It's time for Tim Talk on the Big Fat American Radio Network. I'm Zach Martin. We've got a lot to get to today, and it's been a while since we've last spoken to Timothy Welsh. I've noticed that things seem to be going at a much quicker pace now, more so than ever, Timothy. It's almost as if what Art Bell used to speak of, this quickening. It didn't seem like too long ago that we were beginning 2019. Now we're already into the month of September. And before you know it, we're into 2020. And I've been hearing the rumors of recession. I don't know how much of that is manufactured in the media. It's kind of coincidental, and there's no such thing as coincidence, that we're getting into another election cycle. 2020 is when we choose to either reelect Donald Trump or replace him with another candidate. And it's just kind of interesting how everything seems to be lining up, and people are rooting for a crash in the economy just so their side could win. I think regardless of who's in the White House, that is really an evil way to think of things. You know, let's let the economy crash and have a depression or recession so that SOB in the White House doesn't get reelected. I don't care who the SOB is in the White House. It's not good for us to have a recession, because when we have a recession or depression, the people that are already vulnerable become even more vulnerable because there's less resources available. And by the way, when you have less resources available, that's when the scapegoating starts to happen. And if you're not too careful, you end up in a world war. So it's not something that we should just go, oh, well, so what? The economy crashes. It's a big deal. Then we have the massive amount of student loan debt that's out there, including myself. I must owe almost $70,000. I was talking to a friend of mine, Timothy, the other day, who's a doctor, and he goes, I'll be paying back those student loans until I die. And why does it take people so long to pay back the student loans? Well, it's, for the most part, based on a ratio of what you can afford to pay, and the expenses keep going up for a lot of people. If you have a child who's special needs or might be having some medical problems, before you know it, you have very little expendable cash. So there's a lot going on, a lot to get to. Why don't you give us an update of what's going on in your world, Timothy?
Well, we went through the whole getting ready for back to school, and we got a few bumps and bruises, not even a week into school, and we already had one trip to the urgent care for Tanner. Just life dealing with somebody with level 3 autism with epilepsy is just an adventure every single day that never gets airtime on traditional media. I don't know why it is that we don't want to see these individuals, but when Tanner has these seizures, he can just flop forward or flop backwards, and a lot of times that means a trip to the emergency room for stitches.
A lot of people are talking about CBD oils. How's that impacted Tanner? I know that you've had him on. These CBD oils. They're quite expensive, especially the good ones. You've noticed any changes with in regard to seizures?
His activity levels as far as energetic outbursts have been less, and the seizures seem to be a little bit milder than they have been in the past. Of course, when you lose that electrical function and you just fall over frontwards or backwards, it really doesn't matter how mild or short the seizure is. It just takes less than a second just to put your head into a wall or corner or something like that. So we're slowly doing some testing with upping the dose of some CBD oil, and then even looking at now there is a prescription synthetic on the market, and we're considering that. And then there's also a number of trials that, of course, the medical establishment wants to jump in, and then there's a whole myriad of issues that has to be discussed about, is it worth putting him into a trial that we don't know the efficacy and side effects from whatever the drug is, and then also, is it worth even going through if 50% of the people in the trial just get a placebo? So then there's that whole discussion that comes about with that.
And it always seems like health-wise across America, I'm seeing more and more sick people. Now, there's a lot of reasons for all of that. Well, first off, when you look at the history of humanity and just maybe 100 years ago, the life expectancy isn't like it is today. And then you add to the fact the toxins in the environment and various things it does to genetics. And well, I give you an example. The people that responded to 9/11, they're still suffering cancer today from something that happened 20 years ago. And they're horrible forms of cancer, whether it's blood cancer, lymphomas, or maybe pancreatic cancer seems to be on the rise. And in my ministry, where I deal with people as a hospice patient, I've seen an uptick on ALS patients. It used to be something that you would only see in the movies, Lou Gehrig's disease and the story about Lou Gehrig, and you didn't really know anybody with ALS. Now, I've seen a couple of cases over the past few years. It's interesting that the ALS cases that I've dealt with, interacted with, are from the western part of New Jersey where there's more farmland. Are there some toxins that are coming into play in that? Maybe some pesticides? I mean, it's a neurological type of disease, so that's plausible. And then the other things that I've seen in the news recently is the opioid epidemic. And Johnson & Johnson was taken to court, and they lost, and they have to pay billions of dollars or millions of dollars, whatever it might be. Excuse me, maybe $500 million. And I think it's a dangerous precedent in that a lot of the people that abuse opioids, it's self-induced. I get it that it's been marketed as a pain reliever and that maybe some of the practitioners misuse these opioids. But, hey, if you have somebody who wants to get a hold of these opioids, they'll go find ways to go get them, and then that's where the abuse starts. So to go after the pharmaceutical companies, whether it's opioids or for vaccines or any other kind of medication, Timothy, there comes a point where we have to be very careful because we don't want these pharmaceutical companies to go completely out of business, because if that happens, then we're not going to have the medical care and the medicines that we actually need to survive some diseases and some conditions.
You're absolutely right. The personal responsibility issue is, they used to say, buyer beware. And you taking a step back, I mean, there's a lot of things just being thrown at us. Who would have thought a couple of years ago that talcum powder was bad for you? And then we find out there's asbestos in it. So
I never realized that.
The old things that we used to use, my mother doused me in something called mercurochrome every time I got a scratch.
Yeah,
and
me
was
too.
Basically a mercury compound, and we found out that's a bad thing for you. And so we find out some of the old things we did were bad for us, but then we add on all the new things where you can't even read the labels as far as what that is, and then they hide it. They say, okay, 1 minute high fructose corn syrup is bad for you, and then what do? They just change the name so it's something else on the label, and nobody knows what that something else is. So there's a lot of confusion, but basically as conservatives, as humans, we take responsibility for ourselves, and we have to look at the air we breathe, the food we eat, what we inject into and ingest into ourselves. We have to really take responsibility for those things. And all of those things can add up to, if you don't read the labels and the package inserts that come with them, many of these items aren't tested for, they say it right on the label, 13.1, carcinogenic, mutagenic, or impairment of fertility. And what's happening to our citizenry at the moment is the fact that we're getting more cancers, we're getting more autoimmune disease orders, which basically they're eating yourself, or people are infertile. So all of those things are happening, and the statistic that is used is half are sick. And then you can go to halfaresick.com to actually read the study where it says 54% of our kids now are dealing with those chronic illnesses and are sick. But now the issue becomes that statistic is almost 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And has anything improved in the last 10 years? All we talk about is health care systems. As far as the providing of health care, we don't actually talk about health, because health is absolutely not profitable. If you became healthy and your family wasn't dependent on the medical system, you're not profitable to them. So again, it becomes back to the personal responsibility. If you want your family to be healthy, it's up to you to take care of that. You have to read the labels, you have to look after it, and you have to look after yourself.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be that difficult. You would think. I remember growing up, meat was very expensive, so we ate mostly vegetables. And then as more and more data showed that having too much meat is really bad for you, you really need to eat more vegetables, where it was no longer a request from grandma, but a suggestion from your doctor. It's amazing how the price of vegetables has gone up, and it's off the charts. And then even when you try to eat healthy, you find out that when you go to a certain chain restaurant, that they had some sort of tainted lettuce, and that it's making people really sick. So it's on a recall. And then my mother-in-law's reaction is, get all the lettuce out of the house. I'm thinking to myself, why don't we just wash it off? But it's more than just washing it off, because some of those problems, the actual, I guess, the poisons, just call it poisons, that get on the vegetables are not just on the surface, but rooted in the vegetables themselves. So E. coli is within the veins of that lettuce. So it's not something you could just wash off. Now, can you cook it? Yeah, I'm sure that you could take some of the vegetables and cook them really well. But then if you cook them too much, you no longer get the nutrients. So it's, what are we supposed to do? Then you go to the drugstore and you try to find, okay, if I can't really trust the food supply for whatever the reason, and, you know, it's a gamble. Here's the thing about going out to eat. You think of any restaurant. Doesn't really matter, Timothy. You're thinking that the person who's making the meal is very clean and doing the best job possible. They didn't just go to the bathroom and not wash their hands. Maybe they're wearing gloves. Maybe they're not, hopefully they're not spitting in your food, and they're not licking the ice cream that's in the freezer. So you're just having faith in people that you can't see behind the scenes, that they're going to give you high quality, healthy food. And think about that for a second. When we get in this discussion about faith, I can't believe in something I can't see. Well, you put your faith in people that are cooking your food. Why can't you put your faith in God? But that's a topic for a different day. Now, you go into the pharmacy, and you see all of these supplements. And I guess it depends on the doctor you talk to. Got to take this multivitamin, this kelp, and whatever it might be. And then you're told it's really good. And who's telling you that? The marketing people are telling you that. You start to take it, and then weeks, months, or a year goes by, and you're taking it on a regular basis. You find out not only is it bad for you, but it doesn't do anything that it says on the label. One of the dangerous things is the idea that you can have something that will, an over-the-counter supplement that will help your prostate so that you avoid prostate cancer. I would say that there comes a point where you have to go to an actual doctor, a urologist, and get your blood tested and have them do a sonogram on your prostate, especially if you're having trouble with urination, and let a professional actually look at it. And then when you develop your treatment plan, you got to do your risk analysis. You have to do some study, because ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance will get you killed. So I think we're just nonchalant about our health. I mean, and it's easy to get into that groove, right? We go out for pizza, we go to a local burger chain, and we just want to have something, and we always do this. Oh, one's not going to hurt you. You're right. One is not going to hurt you, but how many of those ones have you had? So I think it's intuitive to try to eat healthy, to read the labels. And when it comes to medicines, whether they're medications, vaccines, over-the-counter, pain relievers, whatever class they might be, we have to do a risk analysis. We have to find out what the side effects are. There's one medication that I take. It's called finasteride. And one of the side effects of finasteride is this aggressive form of prostate cancer. So I went to the doctor. I'm like, I don't know if I want to take that. He goes, it's maybe a 0.0001 chance of you getting that sort of cancer. All right, well, if that's the case, I guess I'll take it. So I've been on finasteride ever since. Then I got a call from a friend of mine. He heard the same thing. I said, don't even worry about it. And by the way, when you're in your 70s, like this guy in your 80s, I have more of a higher chance of getting that type of cancer as described by finasteride than somebody who's 85. Chances are they'll outlive it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And I had a friend of mine, and then I'll hand it off to you. His daughter had ulcerative colitis. And so she was on whatever the medication was for that ulcerative colitis when she was 11. And the side effect is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They mention it on television, I do believe, this particular medication, or at least it's somewhere on the label. And he thought to himself, well, at 11, this can't go. I don't think that this is good for her. But he was following the doctor's advice. And what do you think happened just a few weeks ago, now that she's 18? Diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
It's just heartbreaking, the stories that you hear and the things that are going on. And like you said, it really makes sense that it says easy, but it does hard. I've been trying to walk the walk for the last few years. I did tell the audience before that I had 2 heart attacks at 38 and came within an hour of dying. So I try to look at things to help my heart out. And something Tanner and I did a few years ago was go to oatmeal for breakfast. Mm-hmm. Well, now we find out that there's all these lawsuits against Monsanto and Bayer for Roundup. And I was doing my research as far as the oats go. And one of the things that they use glyphosate for, which is basically the element in Roundup, is to dry out, as a desiccant, to dry out the oats. And so then that's absorbed into the oats. And so then quite commonly the oat producers have high glyphosate content. It's kind of like when you get into the corn syrup and you condense everything into that, some bad things enter into that. And so I actually walk the walk. I write a letter to Quaker Oats and PepsiCo, who owns Quaker now, and says, what about this? And the letter I get back from them absolutely goes as a form letter. Our food's perfectly safe as far as we know it. We trust the government and we trust our own services. And you look at what the government does as far as their EPA and their all the things, they just don't have the resources to really check. And when you just hand it off and say the government says that, if you look at most industries, the government kind of goes what the industry tells them to say.
Well, yeah,
and
because
it's so in bad and so many rotating, revolving doors that you're not getting any safety just because we passed it off to the government. And that's kind of why the lawsuits are coming down so hard on Monsanto and Bayer with the glyphosate, is because they just passed it off and said, they say it's safe.
Right. And Bayer had no idea what they were getting into when they bought Monsanto either. And then these politicians are double-minded.
Why would you say something like that? How could you buy a multi-billion-dollar company and not have any that be on the horizon? You would think
you know what?
Smart lawyer.
You want to know something, Timothy? That's the problem. The buyer beware, caveat emptor. A lot of us would like to believe the better picture, and we look at the projections. And when you look at the possible amount of money that you can make by mergers and acquisitions or by starting a business, a lot of people become myopic. So I can see how that happens. Now, moving over to the politicians, please, trusting the government. Just pick up a history book. Just look at the news lately. Look at what we've got to deal with. These people, wow, they are really something else on all sides. But I really don't want to get into the political part of this. It's more of like, let's make people aware so that they can make better decisions. You have to take the time to make qualified decisions. And where do you get the information from? Now, you got to be very careful about the source of your information. I think Timothy does a great job. So if there's a question you have about the safety of a particular medication or the safety of a vaccine or the food safety or any of those things, Timothy can point you in the right direction. So just follow him at Tanner's Dad. I want to do a little bit of a pivot because we look at the population, Timothy, and these numbers are off the top of my head, verifiable. I got them from the Bureau of Labor Statistics when I was putting together the business plan for Big Fat American Media, and our desire to hire people that are on the spectrum and various other disabilities as well, which includes disabled veterans. So we're trying to make a company that is really designed for people that can't get out of the house, along with the primary caregiver. So while I was doing the information, I found out that, according to the BLS, there's over 5 million people that are on the spectrum, all various levels. there is about 19% of the population that is disabled, roughly 50 million Americans. Now, so is it really 55 million? What is the total number? It really doesn't matter, 55, 50 million, if you add them together or not. It's exponential because every person that might have a disability or every person that might be on the spectrum has at least two people in their lives. I realize that there's some people with one person or nobody, but on average, let's just say two people. And you look at that, maybe it could be even three, right? So we're talking about when you include the person itself and two other people, so that's 50 million times three, that's 150 million people that are affected by disability or autism, whatever you want to categorize it as. That's a lot of people. That's going to require a lot of support services. A lot of these support services, by the way, when you bring up a child that has any sort of disability in the school system, you get what they call an IEP. They tell you wonderful things, and good luck in having the parts of the IEP actually put in play that your child will get the education that they're promising. Because, saying it and doing it, two different things. There are limited resources. And then there's a lot of types of services that your insurance will not cover. For instance, it doesn't cover occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, feeding therapy, and God knows what the other therapies are. So, and sometimes you can be on a plan that gets some of them, but not quite all. And you'll find a lot of situations where parents with special needs kids or people with disabilities, they run out of money quite fast. And so therefore they don't have the money left over to put healthy food on the table. Instead, they have to eat the cheap stuff, which is not really good for you. With that in mind, with all of these people trying to build the company that would be inclusive and give people meaningful jobs is quite the task. And I've been looking at this and trying to deal with this, and we're very close. Hopefully something will break open, and it's in the realm of what I know how to do, so I'm trying to do that. But you get to the point where, is it my responsibility? And I've had these discussions with myself and with other people, and with Timothy as well. It's Tim Talk on the Big Fat American Radio Network, just in case you're tuning in. You can always subscribe at Big Fat American on iTunes, RoundRadio.com, iHeart, and my favorite, Spotify, where you can create your own playlist. And there's a Big Fat American playlist. You can also get Big Fat American News, which we do Monday through Friday. Now, it's not somebody else's responsibility when you see something. It's your responsibility. It's my responsibility. We have to do a better job of taking care of one another and loving our neighbor and our enemies as well. We've got to pray for our enemies. That's what Christ says. And if you're a Christian, you just can't cherry pick. I don't agree with that. I'm not going to do that because, you can't cherry pick. You got to be all in or not in at all. Better off because lukewarm gets spit right out of the mouth. Anyway, we could do a better job loving our neighbor. We can do a better job taking responsibility over who we elect to represent us in Congress or on a local level, on the assembly, whatever form of government you have in your state. And we can volunteer our time for those candidates and find candidates that align with our way of thinking or that are going to represent us. I mean, sometimes the answer's on the other side and not your side. You got to really pay attention and just don't move that responsibility from your shoulders and push it over to somebody else. I watch some of these kids that have these special needs, and even they understand what their responsibility is. When you watch them in the classroom, they take care of one another. You got kids that in stories every day where they go out and play with the kid with autism. We're all supposed to do like that. That's how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to respect our environment, not supposed to litter. Take your trash, put it in a proper receptacle, and put it out to the curb when you're supposed to. Don't throw stuff out the window. Don't take your oil and dump it down the drain. Don't misuse things, and don't misuse and abuse animals. Very simple kind of things. When we look at back to this population,
I just want to chime in on your economic impact of what our mission and dream and purpose is. And one of the things a few years back that we noticed with our kids with special needs and autoimmune disorders and gut issues, one of the things we noticed was a gluten allergy that they had. And when we first started talking about that about 15 years ago, everybody laughed at us. I mean, they just said, "Oh, what's a gluten allergy? What's a casein milk allergy? Why would anybody have that?" And all the manufacturers that we went out to partner with, the cereal companies, all those people that said, "Well, if you have a gluten product, maybe you should put that on the label." They literally, I have recordings of where they laughed at us. And so then fast forward to today, 1 in 3 families in America are serving gluten-free meals. So that's the economic impact of the group that we're talking about and who has progressed from when Autism Speaks was founded about 15 years ago, cute little kids on the billboard, to now we're talking about young adults who should be in the workplace. And, of course, the long-term nightmare for parents, which is impacting a number of our kids are in their 30s and 40s and 50s now. Their parents are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. Mm-hmm. They're disappearing off the map, and somebody has to deal with the fallout of looking after these people.
That's right.
Especially when we know in the larger metropolitan cities, they're having trouble dealing with the mental health issues and all the other crises that are going on.
That's right.
Compiling to the homeless populations make up bigger cities than a lot of our rural areas for people to be aware of. I mean, the city of LA has estimated homeless population, and Sacramento in the 30, 40, 50,000 people.
Yeah, living in tents, and now some of the diseases from the dark ages are making their way back into society. Now let's think about what's going on.
People look at me like a deer in headlights when I say typhus and the plague and are on the streets because of the rat infested and the feces infested areas that are out there for these people.
And you can't ignore it, because ignoring it's not going to make any of this stuff go away. That's why it is really evil to be rooting for recession and depression just so your candidate will win or the other guy will lose. That is just horrible, because more people are going to suffer as a result. So we should always strive, regardless of who is in the White House, regardless of the party. I don't care how vehemently you disagree or you cannot stand that person. As Christians, and I'll say this, you have to pray for that person. It does not matter. You pray for the President of the United States, all civil authorities, and for the armed forces everywhere. This is our country. We should pray for our country. We have to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. We have a duty and obligation to make sure that no child goes to bed hungry. We have enough resources to feed everybody in the United States and then some. And who is thy neighbor? Thy neighbor is people throughout the whole world. I mean, we're traditional. Tradition is part of our tradition is to help others. You know, the problems that go on here, they're much worse in Sierra Leone and throughout Africa. They're much worse in certain parts of Asia. There are people who have it worse off than you do right here in your local neighborhood. And then you have people who are house poor. You have no idea what's going on around you. So it's a lack of love and consideration that's making everybody miserable. That's adding to the problem. And these, same people that tell you not to hate anybody, not to be a bigot, not to be a racist, not to be a misogynist, and this, that, and the other thing, are the same people who openly hate people who are not of their political party. I don't understand how hate is going to help anything.
One of the platforms that I have in my purpose is I go to service organizations and churches and fraternal organizations and talk to them about the mission field that they had that they set up 50, 60, 100, 1,000 years ago has changed, and the landscape has changed, and their neighborhoods have changed, and the mission fields that they sent missionaries to third world countries, they need to do the missions field 16 blocks around their organization is. And I call it micro benefits. You pick a family, pick a date, pick a project, say a prayer, get it done. And something as simple as a movie and a meal for a single mother could be a lifesaver for them as far as respite, or even helping them go grocery shopping is a huge boost to just the epidemics, and I hate to say the word, of suicides and abuse and things that we have to talk about it. I don't know the censorship where we can't even say these words we have to break loose. One of the good things that is kind of a little bit off topic is looking at some of the Netflix comedian coming out. The comedians are coming out and they're breaking those barriers of words and things that we can't talk about. And they're actually saying when trafficking and abuse and drugs are impacting our society, they're actually making jokes about that. And that's the first foray into making the general population be allowed to talk about it. If we can laugh, cry, talk, and express emotions, then we'll be able to address the problem.
Yeah, we could all do a much better job by taking care of the people around us and doing the best we can and seeking help when we need it. Here's my parting words of wisdom, because we're running out of time. Stop comparing yourself to people that you see on social media and Facebook. Stop trying to think that success is being a celebrity. Celebrities should not be your icons. Your icons should be the greats like Martin Luther King Jr., just off the top of my head, or maybe Billy Graham, or maybe one of the other priests that you know in your neighborhood. There are plenty of heroes. Maybe that local police officer, maybe the gym teacher, maybe your teacher who taught you history. Let's find better heroes. We need better examples of what we should aspire to. Those should be our icons. And then, and notice I say icons as opposed to idols. Nobody should be your idol. Don't put any idols before God. And then the other thing is, try to be content in all things. And if you have a life that's full of faith, love, hope, and charity and wisdom, boy, you're the real winner. So let's work on that. Let's find ways we can work together. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what the color of your skin is, what language you speak. Obviously, if I only really know English and I'm okay with Russian, but you know,
my parting shot would be to laugh, smile, and breathe a little bit more.
There you
today.
go.
That
there
would
you
be
go.
I just wanted to get that in.
Okay. Well, and the bottom line is we're all in on it together. So you can follow at Tanner's Dad. He's all over the place, all over Twitter. You can check us out at ZachMartinRocks.com. That's our main site where you'll find all the news that you could use. You can listen to BFA Daily News Monday through Friday by subscribing, downloading, and telling all your friends to do the same at iTunes, Big Fat American. Twitter, on Twitter, we're at Zach Martin Rocks. But besides iTunes, we're on Spotify, which I love Spotify because you can make your own playlist. I think that's great. You get to play disc jockey, and I do have a playlist that I designed if you go search for it at Big Fat American, plus all the interviews that we have, not only with Tim Talk, but we interview various artists, as well as musicians and authors. We have artist Ed Heck. Check out the work of Ed Heck. He makes these cartoon doggies. It's the best way to explain it. And we just did something in Alphabet City in New York City where it was a cafe that also allowed you to bring your dog. So we got a couple interviews with Ed Heck. We've got various authors. We have all kinds of rock and rollers over the years, including some videos. And then, of course, the music news and the regular news. And what I really love most of all, you'll find weird news at ZachMartinRocks.com.